Hey, Brandon.
Hey
Hi.
Laurel,
You
how
hear
are
me
you?
okay?
I can hear you great.
Yeah, is my audio all right?
Yeah, it's good. You did a great
And
job.
great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's been a minute. I felt like I was thinking about it. I felt like I saw you yesterday having lunch with you in Pacifica, but I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago. Where does time go?
I know, I know. You can just always add now 2 to 3 years in the middle for COVID and then work backwards from there. But that is so true.
How have you been?
I've been well. Thank you very much.
You've been doing a lot of marketing.
I have. Yeah.
And
That's
when I saw you on LinkedIn or you came up or I came up and we started talking, I said, well, we should just do a podcast on marketing because you have a lot of actual practical knowledge, not theory. And I thought, well, we could bring Laurel on and she can educate people on how you actually look at a budget and think about it and break it up and figure out where the ROI is. And I think I know that I read that you had a budget of one of your, maybe not your current position, but at another position in marketing where you had about a $400,000 ad spend and you returned something like over $13 million dollars.
that is true. I had nearly a half a million in budget and always worked to show the ROI with increased sales or visibility or reputation. But those are usually the three elements that people I work with are looking to improve.
So could you talk about how you approached it? Because one thing I realized that we never done on the show is we've talked a lot about marketing and in theory but we've never really gone in depth to say, okay, Laurel gets $500,000 bucks. Now, how do you look at it and how do you decide where you're going to spend it across all the different mediums? I was talking to someone the other day and they said, well, and I asked a specific question because I was interested, thinking, like, where did you spend your money? Where was the ROI? And the person
Mhm.
said, well, we really, I don't have that. I don't have that silver bullet for you, Brandon. We just spent it across it and it all drove in. And I was like, well, that seems random. But the truth of the matter is that's really sometimes what happens with everybody. And it's because they either aren't tracking it or they just don't know.
Exactly. I found that a lot of people don't have a marketing budget or a marketing plan, or at least, some of the teams that I've worked with over the years, both in companies and on their own, they pay as they go. And there's a little bit of a fear to look back and see how much was actually spent because the dollars go quick. But given my original background, I guess one of my first jobs after business school was working at Procter and Gamble, where there were enormous budgets and they had to be documented and justified. Even in those settings, there was a lot of mystery behind ad dollars and their returns. So I remember sitting in corporate rooms where these questions got asked, the same that you and I would ask, how our dollars are giving a return as entrepreneurs. So I've had a bit of a fascination with that myself. But what I try to do is do it according to the books, according to what you learn is the correct way, which is to look back, see how much you've spent, document it, and then have a plan going forward. And basically, with the 500,000 spend, which was your question originally, I broke it down in a couple of ways. There was when I inherited the budget, there were already existing expenditures on an agency or two or three. Then there were must-haves, campaigns that came up that we had to do. So we didn't really look to plan an ROI. We just knew we had to calendar those campaigns. But I usually divided it in those days, which was, let's say, getting toward a decade ago, between digital and traditional spend. So that was an interesting factor. And we knew that we were high on the digital, lower on the traditional, but that's the direction that we were heading. And that was a strategic decision that we made. So more would open up for something like email marketing and less for a mailing because we knew that we could get better ROI measurements on the impact of that. And we needed more and more to justify our spend. But what I did was I created an Excel spreadsheet where I listed each vendor by category, and digital, traditional as one obvious one, but also some of the others that might be, that we've just talked about here: email, SEO, design, photography, any line item that I could, and then sorted it alphabetically so that I could get a sense of where my money was going when I first inherited the budget. And then I took time to look at the impact in two ways. One, I asked our customers where they found us and started to get a sense of what the trends were over time. So every year I do a big survey of our top customers. And then every time I met a customer, or every time I could glean data from where they were finding us, I would note it either intuitively or I would create a small report to kind of remind myself to be true to where our dollars were being spent and what the most impact was. But that's the big picture way that I would walk through the budget, and then work with my team to understand where those dollars were going on a percentage basis.
It seems pretty crazy that big organizations, I mean, Procter & Gamble, and I remember when I was at AOL Time Warner, we had budgets that were set, and we actually measured a lot. But it's sort of crazy that people spend as they go. Do you think that's because they're just scared? Do you think it's they don't know? Or do you think, I was thinking as you were talking, I don't think what people realize is that marketing has to work with your finance pretty closely to figure out how much money you have or can spend versus going back to the well, so to speak, all the time. So why do you think, I mean, you've worked with a lot of companies, from big companies to smaller companies. Why do you think they do that? Is it because they don't have the money? Is it because they just don't have someone who organizes it, or what is it?
I think it depends on the industry you're in and how competitive it is and how tight the dollars are. I mean, that's the big picture answer. When it's competitive and when the dollars are big, you get a lot more scrutiny, obviously. And I wouldn't want to characterize, Procter & Gamble as not looking at that. But I do remember a meeting in a boardroom where this came up. We need more clarity around how those dollars are working for us. But why it happens, I think as dollars expenditures get higher, then people want to know the impact of those dollars. So I feel that today more and more people are looking to ROI, and there are all kinds of tools to look at to measure ROI, but sometimes they're a little too fancy and a little too microscopic, and people lose sight of the big picture. So I've seen examples of times when dashboards are used and they are prefabricated, but they don't translate to the actual point of sale or the actual customer. So what I like to do, for better or for worse, is to look at how those dollars translate to a KPI that we're looking to achieve. Sometimes it isn't return on dollars for sales. Sometimes it's something like visibility, where it's harder to measure the financial impact of that on your organization or your reputation. I've been working for teams where they have dual goals. Some is educating students and using communications to put information out there to change a point of view. And the other is to win a customer. So I am always learning and fascinated by how ROI can be calculated.
Yeah, awareness is super hard, I think. And there's a lot of ambiguity in that. The one thing that has shocked me, and I think it was before, during, or right after business school for me, when I was working at America Online, I was working in marketing analysis. And one of the things that I learned there, and I'm grateful for, I probably learned more in that division than business school and everything else combined, mainly because we had so much money and we were able to see things. But I think, and you can tell me what you think, I think people think that marketing, it is brand and pictures and messages and things like that. But marketing is actually finance. And when I talk to business owners, even today, I'm shocked that they don't have, nor have they built a waterfall to understand something as simple as email in that sense, because I think when you get the numbers, it becomes really shocking, Laurel, that you could have 100,000 people on your email list, and when you do the math between opens and bounces and clicks and conversions, 100,000 email list turns into a handful of sales. And entrepreneurs or business owners and big businesses, I think even, they're shocked. I worked with a really big magazine, and they had an email list of over 800,000 people, and they're projecting these crazy numbers. And I said, well, can I see the math? And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, I want to see the math. I want to see the waterfall. And people don't do it. And I wonder if companies just don't see someone like Procter & Gamble or these bigger companies. I've seen divisions that have marketing analysis or whatever the right wording is for that segment. But if you don't invest in the numbers, then you really are just throwing money out. And I find it shocking with business schools and everything that we're still talking that we can't measure it that well. I think online's got better, but then the update recently basically changed that, the iOS update, that we can't track people as well.
I love that expression, marketing is finance, and it's not just design. And I think you've taken it a step further than I have. I've always said marketing isn't just design. It's not just the comms. It's about listening. But absolutely, it's about understanding where those dollars went and if you reached your goal. So it's true. I do, I think almost every day, see examples of times when we don't go to the end of the line, to the end of that customer experience. We're shooting out emails, we're projecting what we'll get, but walking down that path. And I'll give you an example of an opportunity I had with a clinical team that was curious to know and needed to know how many calls they would get after a campaign was over. So I took time to look at other campaigns I'd done and the impact of those campaigns on actual clinic calls. I did some estimates, looking back. I talked to people. There's a lot of ways that you get that information, talking to customers, looking at the numbers. But in the end, I was able to project how many calls would actually come in based on this campaign so that they could plan their scheduler's time and their clinician's time. And it actually came to be true. We could kind of predict down to the not that large number of calls that would come in and how many factors affected that, right? How much spend you actually put into a campaign. It's not like your name goes up in lights on Broadway and you're a star. Sometimes it's just a small ad with a small budget, so you can predict a couple of extra calls coming in that week. But the operations teams really wanted to know, and I realized that you can work with people that know one side of the story, but getting through all the way to the end of the line where those schedulers are picking up calls takes a little bit of detective work.
Yeah, I appreciate that example. And the thing that I'm thinking about is that once you understand how many calls you can get and how many you can convert, I call it, now you're printing money. But very few companies get to be able to do that. And the ones that do, they understand for every dollar. But it's funny that, you're online, Laura. You go online and there'll be 100 agencies out there. We'll get you, for every dollar you spend, we'll get you $5 back. Well, if you were doing that, then why don't you just do it for yourself? And I don't believe it's that easy. Even the tools that are out there today are super hard. And I find myself still going back to Excel. How about you?
Absolutely. I use Excel a lot. I use interviews. I use old-fashioned tools. But you're saying you use Excel for what?
I just use Excel to basically track everything. Like there's all these dashboards. So let's say you're doing online ads and you're using Google or you're using Facebook, and they have a back end, but the back end don't actually give you the real numbers anymore. And then you basically have to aggregate all these numbers across all of these different programs into your Excel sheet to get to a real number. And I think that's where probably small to medium-sized businesses and even big businesses, I think, just fall down because that's just not traditionally what people believe marketing is. And then they have that, like, I'd ask you, you were in Procter & Gamble, you have that conversation. What really came out of it? Or did you really have that conversation the next year again?
In that case, I don't know what came out of it, but what came out of it for me was the realization that we don't know and we need to know. And so I always look at numbers and make, as you said, spreadsheets, because the dashboards that one team gives you is one perspective, but you're the owner of the project. Only that's your secret sauce. How you analyze it is your strategy, right? It's not some template that someone handed you. They can hand you a template, but now it's your opportunity to unpack it and to put it in the terms that make sense to your business and how you're growing it. And then develop your own dashboard. But guess what? The market's always changing anyway, and your sense of where you're going, it's going to be adjusted too. So in the end, you're always adjusting how you look at these numbers, going back in time and going forward.
What do you see if we had to pick one mistake that you see people in marketing make all the time that is fixable? Not that everything isn't fixable. Some things are just quite candidly hard. I mean, having tracking codes and things like that for some businesses, just, it may be beyond their budget in the sense that they have to hire people to do that, which seems sort of a waste. But if there was one mistake, what would it be that you've seen?
For me, it's spending time always thinking about your customer and their experience. And this translates back to the financial example I gave you. You know, they see your ad and then what? They click and then what? And they go to your clinic and who answers? So I think that that's one of the mistakes I often see, is that customer journey tracking. And
yeah, people don't talk about it. I mean, you learn it in business school or you learn it in somewhere, but people don't really do that. The people that I have seen do it understand their business well, because I see it on their whiteboards, and they will go through and say, they see the ad, they do this, they could do this, they have forks and everything. I don't know, maybe just because it's hard and people just don't want to do it, so they just keep throwing money at it. But it seems sort of crazy that happens. And I don't know, I guess I'm not looking for an easy answer. I'm looking for an answer for people to be able to address that, because one is you got to have a budget, if we go back to what we're talking about here. And could you talk a little bit about, you've inherited budgets, but you've certainly built budgets.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about how someone should think about that process, and sitting down with a CFO or a finance person, or if it's a business owner because they don't have that finance person yet, and how to shape that? I mean, are there numbers? You should spend 5% of sales or 10% of sales, or what is that? I'm interested from your experience to know if there's some guidelines.
Yeah, it depends on the size of your organization and your industry. And I think that relates to your earlier comment about following customer journeys. Some people do it and some people don't, because it's part of the culture of larger organizations with bigger customer bases, but not necessarily for smaller teams with a small customer base. But I look at my industry. Consumer products marketing spend is 26% of sales. For hospitals, it's about less than 1% of sales. So you look at your industry, see what others are doing to get a sense of, what you're dealing with here. So the CFO of a hospital is likely not going to give me much more than 1% of our revenue for marketing. So that's number one. So I look at my industry. And then number two, I look at my competitors to get a sense of where they're spending. I might look to the channels that I use where I see my customers going, and get a sense of how big they are in those spaces. Then I know how much I have to dial up or my message in order to be heard in this market. And then number three, I go to my customers and find out where they're congregating. What do I need to get them to listen to me? What channels, what media are they listening to or gathering at? and what types of messaging and how sophisticated do I need to be with that messaging.
How do you reach out to customers? Because I get this surveys all the time, and it's only 7 minutes, Brandon. I don't have 7 minutes to give you the data that you're looking for so you can go market more. So are there, I mean, obviously that is a method. Are there better methods?
Well, I like a combination of methods. The survey is helpful. People do like to be heard. And so if I give them the opportunity to talk to me about my service and engage them that way, they're more likely to give me some of the information I'd like, which is communications behavior. So I do engage in that kind of conversation with them. And then number two, I watch their behavior. I try, some ads and see what they do. And then number three, I talk to them. Like I mentioned, every time I can, I get a customer on the phone or whatever opportunity I have to learn about customers through conversations with anyone who can provide that information. I will definitely take it and log it. I do spend time with key opinion leaders in different industries. That also informs me. Oddly, as I said, it depends on the industry, but I think one industry can inform another about customer behavior and preferences, and therefore what to spend and where to spend it. I'll give an example of a time that worked well for me when LinkedIn wasn't being used too much for ads. And the physicians that I was surveying all said that they don't have time to be on the internet at all. They don't get information that way. They get it through sales reps and one-on-one meetings because they're busy clinicians. But when number one, I used an email survey to reach out to them, and I did see that they were responding to it. So that was interesting to me. And number two, I did hear them saying that they were on LinkedIn for career purposes. And I was curious about that. And then I also knew from my own experience that physicians were on Facebook for personal reasons, which I found interesting. And so they were saying that they were never on the internet, but in fact, I came to understand that they were. So I started running some sample ads and saw that they were biting, and then took out a larger budget and got a big success. I was able to turn around a small campaign and get the engagement that we were looking for a very low rate. And people asked, how did I know? And I just said, because I've been tracking it and following it. And I think that's what those with a marketing mindset, as you said, a financial mindset, need to do in order to get the value that they're looking for out of their spend.
Yeah, you scared me a little bit when you told me that physicians said they're getting their education from sales reps.
Oh, not their education.
not but their information, but that's a side note. But it goes to show you that face-to-face still works. I think one of the things that I found, and I don't want to say addicted to it, but if you have a call center and you can listen in on those calls, those customer service calls, those are some of the most. Now, I think in today's world, there's enough software systems that even a small business or a medium-sized business, $100 million business can have that technology. Whereas I think 20 years ago, that was reserved for big companies, because having a customer service call in and then being able to listen in is just has a technology challenge there. But listen, I used to do that at America Online all the time. And like, there's no better place than the customer. I think as a tech person, what do they call them now in the Valley? Tech bros is what my hairdresser calls me. There's a tendency to not, as much as we talk about it and as much as everybody says, reach out to your customer, I think sometimes too often we get impressed with our own echo chamber of the cool feature we're going to build, when really you can just call your customer. I was talking to another friend and I said, we touch base about once a quarter here in the Valley. And I said, well, what are you doing this quarter? And he said, all I'm going to do is call customers. And I'm just going to call them up and talk to them. Like, literally call them up and talk to them. And I think, Laurel, that sounds sort of, I don't know, so basic, but not only do I think that, and I've done that you will get information, is that you also create the most incredible ambassador because no businesses do that. Now, I don't know if you can scale this, but if you can designate that time. And I just found it a little bit refreshing that the CEO of a SaaS software company, who would you think would be doing features and product things and whatever else, is actually going to spend his main goal for that entire quarter is to talk to customers. And if you do that, there's sort of magic that'll happen that will build a blueprint for your business.
And a lot of companies do have the avenue to do that. They've got, like you said, the schedulers, who are an amazing source of information if you ask them. You have your sales team, right? Depending on the company and what the structure is. There are those team members who are like gold because they're in front of the customer. And what I like to see is this path for them to take the information they get and give it back to product or give it back to finance and ensure that the customer's voice is heard. The customer's king. As you know, I think everyone understands that. I hear it on your show, but getting that through, that simple message through, is hard. But if you remember to take the time or figure out how to do it, if you don't have the time, you will win.
Yeah,
and
I'll be honest. I think it's because people are scared.
And you talked about scaling too. I think there's ways to scale, but the basic currency is this engagement and giving them back something. You're not just taking information. You're not just making a transaction. You're solving their problem. So if you drill down to that conversation of what's your problem? I'm here trying to develop a product or trying to develop a service to help you with something you desperately need to have done. That's the point of contact. And I think that's where business becomes an art. You're just connecting with people and getting to what's real for them.
I agree. I think it's because, and it's funny you say that, you hear it on the show, because I think I talk about it and guests talk about it all the time. And my director of operations talked about it with me the other day, and she's like, we're trying to get a product out and figure out the marketing, and she's like, you're just scared. And I think the truth is, we are, at the end of the day, we can talk about all the spreadsheets and all of these things, but to what you just said, we're actually just all humans that have money to solve problems. And if you can solve a person's problem enough that, well, if it actually works, then they'll pay you for it, and then you can have a business. But I think sometimes things get made complicated. I think you do have to have, some things are complicated. I mean, building a spreadsheet to track all this is candidly not easy. Like, you're not going to get your artist from marketing or your design person to build a spreadsheet. You're going to have to get do you agree with that?
I absolutely agree. I agree because there's two players, actually. There's the customer and solving their problem, which motivates me. So I'll spend a lot of time with spreadsheets so that I can understand them better and solve their problem because they're worth it. Number one. And number two, your company can't survive unless you do this. So you've got these two concentric circles, your company and the customer. And if you believe in those two entities, then it's worth going the extra mile and spending time with the spreadsheet so you get your answer. And the answer is usually right. It comes to 4. You can see that the homework pays off. You've got happier customers and you've got a company that's now thriving because you've gone the extra mile.
What's your number one? If I say, hey, Laurel, I got $100,000, I got to spend it on something, or on one marketing thing, avenue, channel, in all your years, where would you spend it today?
That's a really tough question, because as soon as I'm excited about one channel, and I realize that the customers moved on and they're hanging out somewhere else. So I don't know if I would place all of my $100,000 on a single channel because it may change.
Is that because of the customer experience, and maybe we should break it up? Because maybe you're hesitant because you're going to have an initial point of contact
Yeah.
to get awareness about your customer, and then you're going to follow them through their journey and, I don't know, brand or remind or make them know that you're around. So let's just talk about, you're trying to get a cold customer, and I know you're going to probably say the industry. So let's break it down. Let's
Yeah.
talk about consumer products. Let's talk about, hospitals was interesting because I think it's one of those things where you actually have to understand who you are. And I say, are you a vitamin or an aspirin? A hospital is a vitamin. I mean, is an aspirin. I'm sorry. People are going to come to the hospital because they're getting hurt all the time. So it's not as if you have to advertise. Maybe you have to advertise for a specific treatment. Like, I know when I was on the East Coast, the Johns Hopkins would say their sports medicine was the best, or there was another place in Baltimore, Children's Hospitals, where I had my knee operated. So there was these segments in hospitals. In consumer products these days, I don't. It's different, but I'm still going to hold you to the question. You got $100,000. We're going to talk. We're going to meet our cold customers. Where would you spend that money?
I guess my true personality comes out because I'm so much about understanding the situation and where to spend it. I would go stepwise and spend the first half figuring out where to find them and understanding the situation so that the second half of those dollars get spent very well. So I
Would you
would do
spend it
it.
digitally to start somewhere?
I'd have to, so let's say I have to start somewhere with no data. No data. You're just saying, here, we got 100,000. We want you to reach these customers, and we want you to pick a channel based on your experience today in this industry. So today, if I'm marketing to, let's say, my most recent project, which was big pharma and members of the FDA to purchase service to tools and teams to process big data to answer questions that are critical to them. Based on my recent experience, I would use email marketing in combination with LinkedIn ads to reach this customer base.
Well, I like that. I didn't want to go first, but I love email. I think email is not going away. I think you got to be really careful in today's day and age with these data providers, which maybe you can comment on as it relates to buying the list and making sure that you're compliant with the opt-in stuff. But to have something like that you can make initial contact and then follow up on LinkedIn, I think in today's day and age, the problem with LinkedIn, I don't know about you, Laurel, but I got like 50 million bots sending me messages all day, don't you?
That's why I said that my opinions change. While LinkedIn was working really well for me a couple of years ago, I did a campaign and was analyzing it this week and realized that the ads I ran, I wasn't getting individual ROI figures for the individual ads, which were all quite different. And I will continue to do some investigation, but it wasn't as easy as it was when I purchased the ad and they gave me predictions. So that's a little note on LinkedIn and where I'm with it today. But yes, in terms of email marketing, it's a broad net. I, again, looking at my desk today and working with a biotech client and a data client, we have come to the conclusion that email marketing is what we're going to do right now. Now, drilling down and making that palatable, segmenting is where I'm headed next. So I've got my individual KOL list on the one hand, and on the other, I have these massive lists that I can download from Dun & Bradstreet. But in order to get those customers to respond, I'm going to need a little bit of time to develop a relationship with them. So that's where I'm headed with my email marketing right now. It's not as easy as it was when I was the first person to send off an email newsletter to, an audience of 20,000 physicians in Northern California. I won't get those same open rates today as I did then. But if I'm savvy and start to break things down, I think I will. And if I have good content and I'm sincere and I've done my homework, I believe that this channel will work for me. And then this channel in combination with some other things. I think what you're doing today is an example. You're developing relationships, you're providing opportunities for people to learn. And that is one of the areas that I think teams have to focus on. Use email to catch attention, give people the content at the right time that really answers the question they have on their mind today. If you're large, find a way to automate that because there's no other way around it. And you really teach and engage, and then you'll make your sale.
Yeah, I think the cycle got longer because I think the younger generation has been tricked because they grew up online, is my opinion. And there's so much crap that if you don't have a channel that they can get to know you, and when I say get to know you, it could be get to know a hospital, right? Or a company who does data analysis, big data analysis. If they don't get to know you, people just don't trust you as much. And I think the sale, maybe that's made the sales cycle longer. There's certainly products like, hey, I mean, anything that's an aspirin, plumbers don't need to advertise that much. The toilet gets stopped up, or, our door broke, so we need a carpenter. I mean, that it's easier if you're that type of company. But if you're providing not in a really acute pain point, I think you got to stay top of mind. What are you doing I'm curious. So you get the lists, and some lists are better than others. And then what are you sending them out of the gate to get them to open it? Because it's not an offer, right? Or is it?
Out of the gate.
Yeah, like, are you sending them, you mentioned newsletters, so are you sending them an educational piece? Hey, Judy, I saw this, we found, you would customize the email, but we saw this scientific study, it's related to oncology, and we thought that, are you adding value to them? Are you talking about something else? I'm interested how because it's a cold email.
Yes.
And I don't think people know how to start cold email campaigns. I see a lot of people, I receive a lot of email that says, hey, Brandon, buy this. It's sort of like LinkedIn. Laurel, I get these LinkedIn messages say, hey, Brandon, this is what they say to me. And I'm sure they say it to you. Hey, Laurel, we have related people. I think it would be good to connect. Why don't you use my link and schedule 15 minutes so that you can tell me how your business is going? I'm like that is the worst cold message I have ever received in my entire life. You know what I do now with all those bots? Or if they're not bots, they're people who just aren't thinking right. I send them back information about the podcast because I'm like, I'm going to connect. I connect with them. And then I'm like, hey, you should listen to this podcast. Can you give me a review and basically turn it in? But I'm not really joking. I do that. But how do you cultivate this email? Because you get the list and now you got to meet someone over email.
Yes. I'll take you back to an example of a time I was working for an educational institution, and I had a list of press and needed to have them cover us in the news more often. So, I mean, it's a small example. It was a couple hundred, it was a very specific geography and a couple hundred email addresses. So I developed a campaign, a pace, and opened the door and let them know that this was my plan. I was curious to learn more about them, to help them meet their objectives for their, newspaper. And then I was going to offer them this interesting news about this educational institution. I'd be reaching out to them once a month going forward with news, and so good to meet you. And from that, I got responses back. It was a mass email, not individualized, but then started to get individual responses back, and knew who my customers would be based on the first couple of emails. But usually start by creating that campaign and understanding the conversation, shaping it up front.
I agree. Do you have a favorite email program over another one to use?
Well, for myself, I've been using Constant Contact for many years. And with a recent client, we've been using that as well. It's worked pretty well for us. I have another team that opted for a program out of Taiwan that they were using. I don't know what it was, but they said that they would turn to Constant Contact after they finished that. But what's yours?
We use ConvertKit. I followed Nate, the guy who started Nathan Barry's out of Idaho, and I just he it was he created it for what he calls creators.
Yeah.
And for anybody listening, if you want to try it, let me know. I'll get you a code.
I'd like to.
That you can get some money off. But I just found that the bigger ones. So I'll be honest, why I left Nathan for a short time, or ConvertKit for a short time, because I wanted to test more than 2 subject lines. So everybody says A, B, A, B, A, B, but what if I could test 5 or 7? And SendGrid actually allowed you to, and it still may. It's a more sophisticated email program. It's owned by the company that does text messages to Twilio, I think. It's definitely harder to use. You got to be more technical, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they allowed 7 or 5 subject lines, which I really liked, because if you're testing that much on email, you can get it down to figure out what people will open and yada yada. But the one thing that ConvertKit has that I don't think people use enough is, and I did this yesterday, is send to unopens 3 days after the email campaign goes out. And I could look while we were talking,
Mm-hmm.
but that gave me, and in ConvertKit, at the press of a button, you can send to unopens. And in SendGrid and some of these other programs, you actually can't do that. You have to export, and I mean, Laurel, you know that does not. I mean, it's hard. It's not scalable. It's maybe it's scalable. It's just tough. It's going to waste time. So I'll give you real world figures. I sent out an email. I've been testing day of the week. I'm interested what you found, but I sent out an email on what was May 8th, Saturday or Sunday, I think. May 8th. Got 27.5% open rate. And yesterday, I guess it was yesterday, was May 11th. Today's the 12th. I resent it. Now, you can't just resend. You have to change the email. You have to work it so it's not this duplicate. Otherwise, you're going to get penalized. 27.5% open rate on the initial email after about 3 days, 4 days. An extra 12.1% lift. So now you're at 36.2. I mean, that's pretty incredible. Now, ConvertKit doesn't have some things that I don't like that SendGrid did, but I haven't figured out if it's actually needed, but I like to know what device they are. And are they Apple? Are they Android? Are they, those sorts of statistics? And ConvertKit doesn't give you that sort of tracking yet. So, but I rationalize that I'm not really sure if I just think that's cool or if I was actually going to do anything with it. So, are you doing anything like that?
Not right now, Brandon. I'm just thinking of the recent project I did where I left, like I said, I left the email marketing in the hands of the client. We started talking about the campaign, playing it out over time. They didn't have time. They wanted to do a one-shot, which I found not to be best practices. The savvy marketers I know today say, think of in terms of a dozen emails to get a message across. And they were purchasing one shot at a conference for a package price. And so I let them run with that. But they came back from the conference maybe a week or 2 ago and told me it didn't go great, which is no surprise. So that's the only input I have right now on email marketing.
Yeah, excuse me. And I think the email marketing's gotten a little harder, although I think the iOS update was more overblown. That what we found was more the initial hype about how you're not going to be able to track emails was overblown, because I think the fact of the matter is that for Gmail, which most people have, or in the business world, 365, I was just doing some research.
Mhm.
Turns out that Google Business, which I thought would be giant, Laurel, like I thought most businesses for all of our businesses, we use Google as we have our own URL, but we use Google as the back end. I thought Google was killing it, but depending on what stats you read, turns out that Google only has about 5 million or 6 million business accounts, and 365 has something like 25 or 30 million. I have to look. But it's 365 just kills business Gmail suite. And when you think about it that way, they're not using Apple email client to track to open their email. So it just not, you're still getting the tracking so that you can still get the open rates. And we clean our list. We do clean our list. So if I'll send out an email, because our email is more ongoing. I'll send out something and say, "Hey, Laurel, you haven't opened this. You haven't opened. We don't see that you opened an email in the last 6 months. We're gonna kick you off our list." Mainly to get our open rates and our IP addresses good. And quite candidly, it really hurts me to do that, especially when it's so hard to get emails. But if they're not going to read your email and they're not going to be a customer, then why waste your time?
Absolutely. You're reminding me
So
that, yeah, email is still the widest net, and you got to get in there and keep rolling up your sleeves and working with the new parameters that come up, hopefully to protect people. They don't want to be spam.
no, what's that? I think that's true. My email box has 87,000 emails in it. I think 17,000 unopened. I don't do zero inbox. I think it's a waste of time. I think you just use search, and usually people will email me again if I happen to miss it. I think the spam filters have done pretty good, but I think the main thing is you just have to deliver value. I mean, there's emails that I get every day, and I will open them every day because there's valuable information every day. If somebody's just selling me some BS, I don't need to be entertained. There's like a million things. Go on Instagram or TikTok and be entertained. What do you think about direct mail? Yeah, I think it could work well now. I've been on the fence mainly because I'm just scared to do it, but I think I'm going to take a chance because there's less mail in the mailbox. So you can stand out if you do the right direct mail piece. I mean, I take pictures and read them. I get American Express. I get these credit cards. We got 3 credit cards yesterday or credit card offers for gas. I think now the gas card, you remember back in the 80s, everybody had an Exxon and Mobil card because it was cheaper. But these long form letters in direct mail or some other form, there's just not as much mail anymore. So if you could put together a direct mail piece, you actually could stand out. And that direct mail piece sits on your counter. It doesn't get pushed down your inbox. So I'm thinking about that. what type of direct mail pieces have you done? Are these long form letters? Are they flyers? Are they something else? Yeah, there's just little things for 2 cents or 5 cents. They actually can make a big difference in the lift. I had a question. Wow. I think that, I don't know, do you call it, you said you putting out flyers? Were you mailing them or distributing them? Like guerrilla marketing? Yeah, you know who I look at for direct mail that actually does a great job, I think, is real estate agents. I mean, if you think about it, they put their face on every flyer and they send you a flyer all the time. And is and I get annoyed, to be honest with it, but I will admit that I look at the stupid thing every time. They're like, "Oh, well, this house sold in your neighborhood." And we're not selling our house. We have no intention, knock on wood, of ever leaving. Maybe we go somewhere else, but in the near term. But it's interesting that if you can deliver some sort of thing where people become curious as it relates to them, that they will see that. Now, their theory, because I've talked to them, is that they'll keep sending you that and you'll be front of mind when that decision comes, because they can't, it's very hard to guess when someone's going to move, I think, in general, unless you see their LinkedIn and they change jobs. But today's day and age, it doesn't mean anything, right? Because other than some other companies, people are still going to be able to work from home. So their idea is that you're front of mind, but they do a good job of, putting their face on there. And there's one of two things. I don't know. I'm interested in your take. Either they're all copying one another and it all doesn't work, or they're all copying one another and it does absolutely work. But we still keep getting them. Yeah, the politicians in today's day and age have gotten very sophisticated, and I mean it's a popularity contest. It's not an issue. I hate to say that, but it is. And I actually thought about this the other day because these people have their signs in our neighborhood. I was like, who am I going to vote for? And I thought to myself, Brandon, just remember, read before you go, because what you're going to what happens is that people just like, oh, well, I saw his picture on that sign, or that flyer keeps showing up on my door, or it keeps popping up in an ad for me online. And before you know it, you haven't done any research. If you asked me, I couldn't tell you any of his or her stances on any of the political issues, but I've seen the face all the time. And they're really savvy that way, and they're a little gritty because, especially local people, they don't have big budgets. And, and you say to yourself, putting signs in people's front yards is sort of basic, but sure does work, doesn't it, when all the people drive by? I agree with that, and I think it's a great one. I totally forgot about politicians, and politicians have a lot of email lists, and they know how to use that email list. I get annoyed about it. I did have a question before we go, though, that I don't want to let, because I'm curious. What do you think about press releases? Do you think, if you remember, like 15 or 20 years plus ago, press releases were sort of the way that news got distributed, or you got your word out, at least as one of the foundation, one of the pillars that you would put out there. Do you think the press release is dead now, or do you still think it has use? Did you distribute it on PR Newswire or something like that, or just you did? Yeah, and maybe it's just that people get so much news. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Well, I'm really grateful for your time and coming in and having a discussion. It was great to catch up and talk marketing. I have a question. As a senior marketing executive, what does your day look like? So do you work until 2, since you're a night owl? Oh, I just said, well, yeah, I was like, hey, we need let's demystify the 4 hour. As much as I love Tim, and I think it's a great idea. In order to get to the 4 hour workday, you sort of have to do 40, 50, or 60 hour weeks to get there, to get it set up, and it's not always as easy. It's definitely a good thing to aim for, but I haven't heard a lot of people make a lot of money just working 4 hours a day. So I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, people don't keep track of that stuff. As ironically, the most valuable thing you actually do have is time, and it's amazing how much you can waste on things, and then you start to get yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, well, that's probably a whole nother discussion. If you had to give people 3 high percentage tips out of everything, it could be related to marketing, it could be related to managing your day, managing marketing campaigns, and you had to pick 3 pieces of advice to give, what would they be? I think that's good advice, and I agree. Sometimes you're so close, and if you just spent a little bit more time, you'd get an insight that may be lost. So uh, I like taking breaks, and I think you need to walk away from your computer. But the same token, that is absolutely true. So often, that extra time will give you something that you didn't realize. Where can listeners find you if they want help with marketing? There you go. Well, we'll put a link in the show notes for all the listeners. Well, thanks a lot for taking time out of your day to connect. It was really great to see you again. Bye, everyone. Okay, hold on 1 second.